I think these were places of teaching. I think these were what are called memory spaces. This is like the nature of pre-literate societies. They were trying to develop language. You go into like these enclosures, like you got a reconstruction of enclosure D actually at the Shanliurfa Museum, which is incredible. And you go in there and you realize these are important sacred spaces. This is like a kind of cathedral. They're massive. They're like 18-foot tall pillars. It's like unbelievable. And it seems like you could just go around to each section with people sitting around the benches, telling stories and information from one pillar, which is encoded so only maybe the elites would understand it on some levels. But then they would then be able to go and teach the initiates to come in and we'll look at this. And maybe that time of year, this one gets lit up by the sunrise. So we'll talk about this. And it's all designed in this astronomical configuration, in my opinion. So all sorts of possibilities, and I think all of them are valid. I think they're all as valid as one another, and we shouldn't just accept what's on Wikipedia. My name's Hugh Newman. I'm a researcher, a writer, an explorer based in England near Stonehenge. And my main focus currently has been for a few years, in fact, is the sites in southeast Turkey, Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, Sayburç, and a whole bunch of other sites and discoveries that are coming out of there, to me, are going to completely rewrite history. And I call it a super civilization, the world's first one. I mean, because this is just the innovations, the astronomy, the geometry, and everything else is astonishing. And having an understanding of what has been discovered in stone circles and pyramids and the intricacies of all of these, to find the stuff in southeast Turkey so much older and just as sophisticated is incredibly important to kind of get your head around.
Yeah, it's crazy the stuff that we're finding out there. And I mean, you're talking about sites that are thousands of years older than the oldest known megalithic sites that exist around the world, and the technology that we're finding, the things that they were able to accomplish there is just incredible. So I can't wait to get into that and really let the audience know about some of that stuff that we're finding. Some of the more recent revelations that have come out are incredible, and a lot to do with your work specifically. I mentioned the face that gets lit up on the winter solstice. You've talked about the geometry involved, the astronomy involved, the metrology. So really looking forward to diving into this with you. What's a good place for us to kick it off?
Well, I think we should. I mean, basically everywhere in that area is fascinating, but Karahan Tepe is the one we've been looking at closely because this is only recently being excavated. It's only since 2000, late 2019, it really began. The COVID hit, and since then the discoveries are coming out of them. And I've been visiting this site since 2014, before it was excavated. And this is, if people aren't aware, this is an area about 23 miles southeast of the Göbekli Tepe Şanlıurfa area. It's in the mountains, an area called the Tek Mountains. So it's a very vast, desolate limestone area. It's like going to Mars or something. It's crazy. There's a few farms in there, very, very little vegetation. And we got to know the owners of the farm that Karahan Tepe is on. And since 2014, I mean, my friend Andrew Collins, he's written about it as well. He's been going there since 2004, and you have all these T pillars, the tops of them, like sticking out of the ground, all over this hill. This huge hill. It's bigger than Göbekli Tepe, in fact. And and people have always wondered what was going to be found there. And we never thought it was ever going to get excavated until it suddenly started being excavated. So this is now what has come out is absolutely astonishing. I mean, and then virtually the first time we went there since it was excavated, myself and my partner JJ Ainsworth discovered this winter solstice phenomenon where the light comes through this thin hole, this porthole stone, and illuminates this giant stone head, which is carved out of the bedrock in what's called structure A, B, or the pillar shrine. And so we found this amazing winter solstice alignment there as well. So it kind of triggered us into like thinking, hang on a sec, if they're able to do that, then these are very sophisticated people. They were just experimenting and got lucky or something, because you shouldn't be able to, you must have a vast amount of knowledge leading up to that to be able to build that into the bedrock and the stone, carve it out and have it there as a kind of almost like a clock beginning the year. But I think Karahan Tepe is really important because Göbekli Tepe has been, quite a lot of it's been excavated, but even so, that's only 5% of Göbekli Tepe is excavated. It's Karahan Tepe, they're going for it. They're just pushing it. They're like pushing to get the whole site excavated, and they're like, I think more of it's been excavated now than Göbekli Tepe. It's only been going for a few years, whereas Göbekli Tepe has been excavated since the mid 1990s. So, yeah. So and there's a whole bunch of other sites as well, not just these ones.
Yeah, how many are there? What's the? I know there's some debate about that.
Yeah, there's 12. It's called the Taş Tepeler, and means stone hills or stony hills. Really, it's more of a sort. It's not just stone hills. It's more of a kind of like the sacred stone hills. Really, that's the kind of vibe that the name gives out. It's not just random stone hills, and that's kind of what that means. So officially, there's 12. Yeah, but then we were talking with one of the experts over there recently in May, and they said, no, there's definitely now 38 of these sites. But even so, one of the archaeologists and some other researchers before that predicted, based upon discoveries, is that there could be up to 100 of these as well. And this is an area about 125 miles wide in southeast Turkey. And then you've got sites going into the Levant. You've got like going down into Syria, Israel, even pre-pottery Neolithic sites, which is this era, about 11,600 years ago, onwards, going back even into Egypt and all the way up into Armenia as well. And even on Cyprus, they found finding stuff as well now. And so I'm realizing that this is something, more spectacular than people realize, and especially compelling considering these are, 6,000 years before, the Sumerians, 7,000 years before Stonehenge.
Yeah.
So it's quite amazing when you kind of consider that. I mean, these were ancient, these are disappeared, forgotten about, built over, covered over deliberately at the end of their use, and then just forgotten about.
Do you know how much LiDAR has been really used across this general area to really kind of get a really a full picture of how big this could be?
Not yet. No, LiDAR, they've done GPR, I know that, especially at Göbekli Tepe, and they know there's about 20 enclosures there at least. Only 5 have really been excavated, or 6 maybe. And no, they don't really do LiDAR, I don't think. I don't know if it would work there or not because they're buried in stone and rubble
Okay.
and they're stone sites. So I don't know how well it would work there. But there's a lot of sites that have been talked about, surface finds, T-pillars sticking up out the ground. But I would like to check, it'd be really interesting to check all that. I mean, I know that you can actually, I think most of a lot of the planet's been LiDAR'd as such. It's just a case of getting the data and analyzing it, because I'm sure there's stuff like sort of hidden just under the surface that might come up.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then the age of the sites. I mean, we talked about like 11,500 years ish. Can you talk about how we know the age of the site? This material within the stone walls that were not the T pillars themselves, of course, because you can't date stone, but the material that's in between the stone walls that are kind of within many of the enclosures have been dated to that approximate 11,500-ish date range. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah, but what they found is at Göbekli Tepe, this is where they're done. This is like a German archaeological institute. These are like high level scientists. It was originally run by Klaus Schmidt. It's very efficient, very focused archaeologist who I've got a huge amount of respect for. He died, unfortunately, in 2014. And I met him a couple of times, thankfully. And the dating they were getting it is pretty tight. I mean, because basically they were finding stuff in the walls at the very bottom of the walls, mind you, where it touches the bedrock. So you got to remember, this is all built upon bedrock. So they were getting down to the bedrock and taking stuff out from there. They weren't just taking it off the top of the walls or anything like that, which would be possibly later. So I think it's pretty accurate. I think it makes sense the dating of about 9,600 BC, 11,600 years ago. But there was still a couple of hundred years either side of that. But you go before that, and you've got the whole Younger Dryas. Within a 200 year before that, 9,800 BC, there's still the horrific weather, freezing cold, all that kind of stuff. Only really started warming up around that time in that area. But there are sites, strangely, which are older. There's a place called Climatic Tepe, that's southwest of it. Now, no T pillars there, but it's certainly a settlement area. And they were carving out the bedrock as well. This is all around the Euphrates River, these sites. There's a bunch of settlements over in that area, which date to 1,000 years before Göbekli Tepe, like Bonchoklu Tala, Kortik Tepe, and you've got a couple of others, which are pushing those dates in that area, which we visited some of them as well. And so that suggests that there was, and these weren't T-pillar sites, but they had megaliths. Was sort of megaliths, small, 5 foot tall stones, enclosures. Some of them were roofed, we know that. Some had porthole stones, like you get at Göbekli Tepe. Kortik Tepe had these beautiful, hand-sized stones with 3D relief carvings on, which is similar style, but although much bigger at Göbekli Tepe. But it shows you there could be an influence coming in from the Tigris River settlements, or they emerged because of the improvement of the weather. The cataclysm was all over. They all started coming together, and so it's difficult to know. We're trying to piece this together for our next book, about how this could have all happened and why it happened. But you've got to remember that there were the Natufians who were around before this as well, mainly in the Levant, but also going into Turkey, modern day Turkey, and they created beautiful stonework, beautiful, like stone pots, quite big ones, urns, different plates and things like this. Not quite the quality of Karahan Tepe plates, or what you find in Egypt much later, but we are, there is certainly a development leading up to Göbekli Tepe. A lot of people say it just came out of nowhere. And in a sense, it did, because the innovation suddenly went ballistic at that time. But there was a build up. You could see a progression, a build up to that point, as well, if you look carefully and look at the data and look at the discoveries and look at the dating. But yeah, when it comes to the actual dates, they are pretty tight on the dates, I think. Although Klaus Schmidt, before he died, when I spoke to him, he told me and Andrew when we met him briefly at the site back in like 2015, sorry, 2014, before he died, and he said that he believes at Göbekli Tepe they're going to find dates going back 14,000 years. And whether he was just wildly speculating, we don't know, or if he was serious about this. But Natufians, we know, go back nearly that far as well. So there could be something going on there. We also have the dating of Karahan Tepe. There's all this controversy about the dating of Karahan Tepe officially it's 9,400 BC, although on Wikipedia and some articles that came out 2 years ago, they say it's older. I know Ben van Kerkwijk and the Snake Brothers contend, because they're basing what that from that information that Karahan Tepe is actually older. Now this could well be the case. Now this is like really interesting, because when they were making their first discovery things at the site, they were finding dates older than Göbekli Tepe. But then they realized that the actual construction, what you find constructed at Karahan Tepe, really is no older than 9,400 BC. So the site was being used before that time, for quite a period of time, maybe 1,000 years, 500 years, as a kind of maybe a hunting area where they would meet up and do things. Maybe there were some natural bedrock features which would lop, and they would that's why they built the solstice alignment into it slowly, and then they slowly started building the site from around 9,400 BC onwards. So that's what we think. We think that there is actual dating that goes back before the time of Göbekli Tepe at Karahan Tepe, but officially it's 9,400 BC, whereas Göbekli Tepe is 9,600 BC. But who knows? I mean, the other problem is that before Karahan Tepe got excavated, there was a big announcement and a big new kind of promotion of Göbekli Tepe being the 0 point in time, the oldest site in the area, and all this kind of stuff. And so they couldn't really have another site being older than it that was going to be just as well known. And so, so it could be a political move as well. And so you got to look at these kind of elements here. But I think the head archaeologist at Karahan Tepe is pretty solid. I don't think he's going to give false dates to, I think he's going to be as accurate as he can.
The Younger Dryas was a time period of about 1,200 years, from 11,600-ish to 12,800-ish years ago, where the climate was going through dramatic changes. There were sea level rise, there were temperature changes. There's evidence that a lot of the Earth's biomass was on fire. There were extinctions of megafauna from around the Earth. And so we know that took place around the same time. So it seems like that these structures, a lot of these structures were built, or the dating that we're getting from a lot of these structures seems to be right kind of when things kind of settled a little bit down. How much evidence is there that people were creating and building these massive structures during some of the most difficult climactic times in human history?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, like I say, the other sites in the Tigris area and the pre-Göbekli Tepe sites, they weren't so megalithic, really. They were kind of more, weirdly, they were settlements, but these were hunter-gatherers settling and building and like still quite advanced, knowledge of like working with stone. They would make, there's even early evidence of terrazzo flooring, which is like this lime mortar, which is like, almost like geopolymer. And they still were pretty smart people. They had an understanding. They were building structures for survival. They were started domesticating some animals in some places, but really the thick stuff, the big kind of structure, really didn't happen until really Göbekli Tepe time, Karahan Tepe time. That was when that era. So it was after the kind of horrific weather, if you like, that started really happening. Before that, it feels a bit more survival oriented, rather than innovative. When that really kicked off, I think when people could relax a bit, the climate had improved. There was abundant fauna and flora. Um, there was food available everywhere, which may have became a problem. That's why they started developing agriculture within a couple of 100 years of Göbekli Tepe being built. Because that was definitely afterwards. Because for a long time it was thought that agriculture instigated the building of structures. Well, actually, now it's the other way around. The megalithic structures were being constructed to a very advanced level. Then agriculture developed from that as such, or even possibly some people say independently of that. It just happened to be at roughly the same time. But I think there's certainly a connection, especially when you start looking into all the biblical legends and the whole Garden of Eden story and all that associated with it. But there's a lot more to this than meets the eye, and there's still huge contradictions between different archaeologists, different researchers, and the data that's coming out, because the conclusions are trying to be made already by the archaeologists, and you can't really do that yet. There's not enough data to really kind of prove things one way or the other.
When you look at kind of what we're talking about now as it relates to Göbekli Tepe and these other sites, we're talking about cement. I mean, cement, I think we had thought was like a Roman invention, right? For a couple of thousand years now, we thought that the Romans were the first ones to come up with that. But now we're talking about cement. We're talking about potentially alcohol, brewing beer. I know that there were poisonous snake heads found, which potentially could mean dotes and antidotes, and there could be different ceremonies happening. What was happening? I mean, I want to get into all of that, and I want to touch on the evidence for all of this. I want to touch on like the fact that they're making these stone plates out of some of the hardest stones on Earth. We've got granite, we've got basalt. You've got just some incredible things happening here. What do you think this place was like? What were they doing here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but there's like it's all about innovation to me. I think the innovation is insane. I mean, you go back to that time. Imagine, being a hunter gatherer, and suddenly you think, well, actually, let's try and make some cement. Let's try and carve some beautiful stone plates from basalt. let's create air conditioning under our houses at Nevalı Çori in 8,300 BC. Things like this. You can, to me, it must have been some trigger, and I think the climate was a big trigger. But I think different groups came in together and decided to put their heads together. And I think there were some very genius level people there. I mean, I think we're talking, the memory of these are recorded as the Watchers from the Book of Enoch or the Old Testament, or even the Anunnaki from the Sumerians. I think we have to consider that because the level of sophistication that suddenly grew from this place, from this area, was outrageous. It just doesn't make sense. And that doesn't include the astronomy and the geometry and the metrology of these sites. Well, if we just look at let's look at some examples you mentioned. All right, so we'll talk about the terrazzo flooring, and the plaster. They were just basically you have to get, you basically break up limestone, you heat it up. You have to get it to like something like 850 degrees, which is hot. It's like you have to have a proper supersized kiln to get it to that hot. So you break up this limestone, and then you mix some of the powder with water and the small chunks of limestone, which toughens it up. And then you lay it down, you dry. And then they would add red ochre to this as well to give it a bit of a kind of color. Sometimes they would actually create lines of red ochre in it, like you get in the Valley Churi and Chianu, another site which is north of Diyarbakir. And and so this was, they were carving out the bedrock, they were leveling floors of these enclosures, then they were kind of leaving curbs around the edge, like little benches, a few inches high, which I believe that they were slotting the T-pillars into originally before they built any. The walls were later additions. This is why the question of the dating comes up over and over again. But I think they were slotting into these, slots in the bedrock they were carving out. But also they were creating like the Nevalı Çori and a couple of enclosed at Göbekli Tepe, and we think at Karahan Tepe. They were creating these. They were laying down this terrazzo floor, and then letting it dry, and it hardens as hard as modern cement. It's really good. It's very smart, very simple technology. But where did that idea even come from to heat up a bunch of stone, to like see what happens, kind of thing? And so then they realized, oh, actually, this is really good. And you can actually lodge T-pillars into the terrazzo floor, and they would stay upright because it's like, cement, compacting it in the base. And so that was developed back then, and that was used in abundance. I mean, we're talking hundreds of square feet of it at certain sites. And so, but why? Why not just carve the bedrock if they can do that? Why would they need to go to this level, this extreme level of creating this certain type of product, this technology, which I'm sure they would sell the idea to other people across the region. And yeah, so that's one innovation. Another one we can talk about is, again, we're at Nevalı Çori. Now this is a little bit later. This is pre-pottery Neolithic B era, 8,300 BC onwards. It's one of the later sites, and this is when they became more settlements. And you have like lots of domestic buildings, and you have a main enclosure. This time it's a square enclosure, and in that's got terrazzo floor. But some of the buildings were huge. They were like 16 meters or 40 feet long, like 9 feet, 10 feet high. And then, with roofs, they were like made of plaster, like terrazzo kind of plaster, with wood and everything else, and carving out beds and things like this. But underneath the main house, probably the kind of royal house of Nevalı Çori, they carved these channels, and the water from the Kantara stream, which comes in from the Euphrates River, they would actually have little sluice gates. They would open them up and allow the cold water to come in on hot days, and the cool water running through kind of cool the air. And so this is the first ever air conditioning invented anywhere on the planet, 8,300 BC. And so it's like, why isn't this a big deal? I mean, why aren't people, everyone talking about this? To me, this is mind blowing. They, now we take it for granted, air conditioning, fans, and everything else, but they were doing it with nature, working with the natural elements to get this. And to me, that's more innovative than inventions today, because you haven't got any electricity, you haven't got anything, you haven't got any tools, you don't have any already pre-designed things to kind of make that work. Whereas then they had nothing; they had to do it all from scratch. And so little things like that are just mind blowing. Um, and then you realize that, as you mentioned, they were brewing beer and they were brewing. Basically, this is mainly from barley. They brewed a beer from barley. They found all these big vats at Göbekli Tepe and other sites. In fact, they found evidence at Cortic Tepe, which is older than Göbekli Tepe. This is near the Tigris, one of the sites there, of wine production. They found evidence of wine inside some of the um, enclosures or houses there. So that's really interesting. That's older than Göbekli. But this beer production, it's not really beer anyway. It'd be like a gruel, disgusting gruel, hoppy kind of thing you sort of chew on to drink if they're going to produce it. It's not going to be like a nice glass of ale you get down the pub. It's going to be a little bit rougher, probably not as tasty. But problem with that is that you do get an alcohol content, but not very, very low alcohol content. But if you leave it for a while, you get ergot growing on it. Now, this is a psychedelic fungus, which Albert Hoffman synthesized LSD from. And so you have a little bit of accidental ergot in your system, and you're going to be like tripping like were in the 1960s. It's like, absolutely powerful hallucinogenic. It can kill you as well, ergot. It's pretty powerful. There was a whole sort of spates of it in France in the medieval times, people getting sick from it and dying from it and tripping out from it, going mad from it and things like this. So I believe that they knew what, not necessarily knew what they were doing, but they accidentally discovered ergot. And we know that they were using that because even before that, at Rekachek Cave, I think it's called, in Israel, going back nearly 14,000 years ago, they were producing beer there as well, earlier than Göbekli Tepe. And this had ergot on it. And they had this skull death cult associated with it. So they realized these people may have been tripping out big time. And so I think that may have been happening at Göbekli Tepe, especially when you see as well, you see mushroom symbolism all over the place there. There's lots of evidence, lots of head shapes, which are like the shape of a kind of mushroom. And there was bovine activity there. There was cows and cattle, aurochs, and everything else. And magic mushrooms or psilocybin would grow on the dung. So I think they were drinking, they were taking LSD, and they were on mushroom. So I think this is where innovation may have actually come from. I mean, I'm quite serious about this, especially when you look at they found evidence of mushrooms and cannabis at Çatalhöyük, which is a couple of thousand years after Göbekli Tepe, further west, which is a famous site before Göbekli Tepe got discovered. And so there's something about that. It's the whole food of the gods, Terence McKenna idea. But I really believe, I mean, you look at some of the abstract design, you look at some of the bizarre ideas and the kind of artistic flair on the statues, on the T-pillars, and in the creation of these sites, and the geometry and like studying the stars. This is all very a psychedelic influence, in my opinion. And it was hugely influential because I think you look at the 2,000-year period these sites were in operation, the same style was continued and duplicated. It wasn't changed. They came up with the first design, everything stayed the same from that moment onwards. And so, why did that happen? So, why? It's almost like the first part of it was the perfect part, and the rest just copied it from there on.
What would have caused? Could climate change have caused all of the I guess you would see an influx of human population into this area for some reason, I guess, right? I mean, like why would people have all decided this was a very fertile place? This was above the Tigris and Euphrates River. This was a good place for humans to live and survive back thousands of years ago. Is that why people swarmed here?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's pretty. Yeah, I think they were following the rivers. I mean, all these, you got the two big rivers and all the streams coming off them. Euphrates is the one, all the Göbekli Tepe and everything's kind of near-ish, and all the tributaries, and then you got the Tigris where all the other cultures are. It's only like a couple of 100 miles between them.
Yeah.
But these are the two sort of sacred rivers of biblical tradition, although usually it's much further south where they connect in Mesopotamia, Iraq, Iran, all that kind of area. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, because for some reason this just seemed to be where it was all happening, and I guarantee they were just moving along the rivers, and they were probably just working out the best places to do things. But also, there may have been other reasons. I mean, it could be just this was known, going back to Mesolithic, Paleolithic times as a sacred place. it may have been seen as a sacred place. I mean, because Göbekli Tepe is there's something about it. There's something kind of strange and magical about it. Even before it got discovered, people would go up there to this spot, which is known, and there were lots of burial. Later medieval burials and Islamic burials would use that hill to bury their dead. They planted a mulberry tree there, which became known as the wish tree, where people would go and make wishes. It was also a fertilizing kind of area where people would go up there in a sacred way and look for fertility to enhance their pregnancy and wish to the gods and the ancestors of that spot where this mulberry tree was, this wish tree, and leave ribbons on it and things like this, not knowing that right underneath them was part of Göbekli Tepe, which is still partly buried right at that spot. In fact, it was right next to Enclosure D, where this was weirdly all happening. And in Enclosure D, there's a major spiraling magnetic anomaly as well, which is being recorded in the natural geology there. So that could have been, something about the magnet. There might be They might have noticed that and sensed that and seen that as sacred. Um, because when there's magnetic effects, it kind of affects your consciousness, and it's also related to fertility. This is the work of John Burke, Philip Callahan, and others. And so you have to consider all these different things, and also magnetic anomalies can create strange lights and balls of light, orbs, even all around where they occur. And so there might have been luminosities in that area which they got attracted to, and it became this sacred place long before anything was built there. And so it could have had a sacred meaning before anything else. So that's why they decided to construct I believe the temples there, because there are settlements down by in Llanlurfa, which is like 10 miles away, called Yemenahali, and this is where they found Earth and Man statue, with the V-neck and everything. There was a big settlement there, and the river ran through there, the streams would come through, there were springs there. It's a very rich, abundant, lush place. But up on the hill in the mountain there, you have Göbekli Tepe, away from all the water, away from the civilization, even though the modern archaeologists are trying to make out that this Göbekli Tepe was the domestic site. I believe the main domestic site would have been down in Llanlurfa, and then they would go up there to do their kind of special events and things like that.
Given that it's been hundreds of thousands of years that intelligent hominoids have been on this planet, and we can't really date stone, I mean, is there any crazy theory or logic to support the idea that these could be way older? I mean, that this bedrock could have been carved out, or these pillars could have been placed 50,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. I mean, is there any thoughts there? Is there any data to support any of that craziness?
That craziness is compelling. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the ways that my good friend and colleague Andrew Collins helps that, and this is what Klaus Schmidt did as well, was the arrowheads that are found at these sites, types of arrowheads. You can kind of date cultures based upon the tools and the arrowheads, the blades, the microblades, all this kind of stuff. And so they haven't anything older than particularly 12,000 years at Göbekli Tepe with the arrowheads and the microblade technologies. Although there is, I mean, I think it kind of helps date it better than, in a way, but, it backs up the kind of carbon dating. So I personally don't think there's anything much older,
Okay.
but I think it could be a bit older, because it would make sense with the arrowhead finds. We know that there's sites very close, like Çakmak Tepe, which goes back 600, 700 years older than Göbekli Tepe. The Tigris River settlements as well, obviously. But there's also this microblade technology comes in from the kind of Ural Mountain, the Russian steppes, over a 30,000 year period. They've noticed a progression coming south from that area. They've also found what's called a Helwan Point, which is something Klaus Schmidt wrote about, Andrew's written about. And this is Helwan's in Egypt. So they found the type of arrowhead found in Egypt at a place called Helwan, not too far from Cairo, Saqqara area. And there was a whole settlement there. There's actually, I believe, some of the stone vases, are almost this kind of dating, as far as I'm aware. And I was talking to Ben about this, Ben Kirkwood, and so there's even connections going from that direction as well. But the microblade technologies from 30,000 years ago coming down into that area do support the dates more or less that Klaus Schmidt and others have put forward. But the fact that they're definitely finding, like Karahan Tepe, they're finding older arrowheads there and microblade technologies which have pushed the date back, but not of construction, just of people hanging out in that area. So it's a big question mark, to be honest with you. But you got number one as well. They've only unlocked a very small amount of Göbekli Tepe. They might found older blades and microblades in the fill of a bit they haven't excavated yet. And so you got that to consider as well. And so I think, you might get what Klaus Schmidt predicted. You might get dates going back 14,000 years. That could well be the case.
So you've spent a ton of time over there, right? I mean, you go there several times a year. You're based out of England, but you're there. You're in Turkey, visiting these sites multiple times a year. You take tours. Is that correct?
Yeah. We do tours. I mean, our knowledge of the area is increasing constantly, and we've been doing tours for like 12, 13, 11 years or so, on and off. Anyway, we first went out there. In fact, we went out there the first time out of 2013 with Graham Hancock as one of our guests. So that was very, very
That's
nice.
cool.
It was his first time out there as well, so it was very nice to go out with him. But Andrew is really the main writer on this whole area. He's been writing about this area since 1996. So he's inspired me a lot to kind of start looking. We come in, we have different, perspectives. We have different, disciplines we're focused on, so we don't clash with our research. But there's, I mean, it's a really important place. I mean, this is like what's happening out there now. Now is the era of discovery there. It's like going back a few hundred years into ancient Egypt or the Mayan jungles of Guatemala and Mexico. When people were discovering pyramids and finding them, hacking through this is literally happening now. I mean, we've actually found stuff ourselves by just going to unexcavated sites, having a look around, getting to know the locals and the families, always having permission, of course. We found, a kind of a broken T pillar at an unexcavated site that no one has ever recorded, just lying there in a field. We're like, what the hell?
Mm-hmm.
And we've been going back there a few years, and it's still there. We found it like 2.5 years ago, and it's still just sitting there.
Too heavy
so
for anybody to move.
Yeah, it's just crazy. And we've got photos of it. And so there's also an underground tunnel we kind of located as well near one of these sites, which is like 100 meters long, carved out of the bedrock. No one knows who did that when it was done. It's very weird. So there's so much, and there's a site called Sayburç as well, which is really interesting. That's just started to be excavated. It's actually partly under someone's house. There's even a whole underground area there. And we must remember there's like all the underground cities we find as well. There's evidence at Derinkuyu, way over in Cappadocia, near Çatalhöyük in that area. That is actually much older. They found Paleolithic and Mesolithic microblade technologies there.
Yeah.
And so we're finding, there's a lot going on. I mean, and there's also like you get polygonal walls in Turkey. These aren't as old. These are like Hittite and Hattian sites, which go back 5,000 to 3,000 years. You get polygonal walls like you get in Peru. In Turkey, just all certain areas. You get cart ruts there. You get other, you get dolmens there. It's crazy. I mean, but these are very unknown kind of areas that we tend to go to as well. To when we look around, go on tours and other such things.
Here we are, and we have all of these structures. Now, does that change? Can that go back and change and maybe upset the apple cart a little bit, but force a rewrite to some of the history that we've written about some of these other ancient sites, like Derinkuyu, which is a complete mystery. Nobody knows how old that site is. Could that potentially, do you see a time in the future when history is rewritten a bit and we see a little bit more alignment between some of the ancient structures around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think Derinkuyu is a good example. I mean, there's a researcher, I forget his name, unfortunately, but where because the first levels are the oldest, the first one or two levels, and they're quite well carved. There's no metal being used there. The other levels, there's metal being used to carve them. You can tell the difference in striations. He found the areas where they dumped all the stone and dust by the river, and found the microblade arrows and all this kind of stuff, and found that these were Paleolithic, mainly early Mesolithic. So we're talking about the era around early time of Göbekli Tepe. And so, and he documented it, published it, and that was it. Yeah, but that's completely ignored now if you go to the site now. And so you got that kind of thing. But also, like my local site, Stonehenge. I live just nearby, and that has got evidence going back 10,000 years, 8,000 BC, of these giant post holes made of pine wood, which were found there. And these were like 3 feet wide, possibly 30 feet or so tall, aligned roughly east-west. And there's also a site called Blickmead, which is a flint napping site just down the road from me. And that goes back the same era. That's also a natural spring area as well. And so they were marking the location of Stonehenge 10,000 years ago. This is like the era just after, towards the end of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. And so I firmly believe that these are all connected, because what I've found as well, which is very strange, is I found the same kind of geometries at Göbekli Tepe in just the enclosures that have been excavated, and at Karahan Tepe, as we find in the British stone circles. And not maybe Stonehenge specifically, but other stone circles in Britain. That, to me, that is utterly compelling. I mean, it's so obvious when you look. You find the same. This is all based upon the geometries of Alexander Thom, um, who was a Scottish engineer who surveyed like 300 to 500 stone circles in the British Isles and Carnac in Brittany as well. And he found all these flattened circles, these egg shapes, these certain types of ellipses, all these variations were quite complicated in these stone circles. And I couldn't believe it when I applied them to Göbekli Tepe and got exactly the same ones coming out. And also the measurements. I mean, I'm finding the metrology is the same at these sites. Um, there's certain measurement systems, like we have the megalithic yard, which is 2.72 feet or 0.83 meters. We have the English foot, but we also have all these different lengths of foot, like the Persian foot, the Assyrian foot, the Sumerian foot, the Samian foot. All these, they're all perfect fractional relationships from the British foot. This is the real fundamentals of ancient metrology, developed by John Michel and John Neal. Give them full credit here. And even we're finding the Egyptian cubits. There's two or three different versions of the cubit: the royal cubit, the long cubit, and the short cubit. And they're found at Göbekli Tepe. The Sumerian palms found there. We're finding Egyptian feet at Göbekli Tepe. And so you got to, like, what on earth is going on here? And we're talking whole numbers as well. We're not just talking random 0.6 of that length. We're talking whole number, perfect measurements found at Göbekli. And so a lot of these measurements are based on the measurements of the Earth. So they must have had an understanding of Earth measurements at the time of Tepe. Otherwise, this is one of the biggest coincidences on the planet, because this is just and then you realize, actually, this is where it all came together. This is where the metrology and geometry was innovated, invented. They were experimenting with all this. They were kind of creating all this and building with these design specs in mind, and making sure it was preserved by before they buried the site. Even though some of it caved in and they had to repair it and put everything back in position, there were slippages that should now be proven. But then they buried the sites to preserve their original dimensions and shapes and things like this and geometry. So for future reference, which was a long time in the future, because you have cultures forgot completely, didn't know anything was there, coming through the area for thousands of years, no idea what was right underneath them. And so this is what's really interesting. It's only in the 1960s and then the 1990s that it all started coming to light. And so we've got a huge missing chapter of human history emerging from the ground in southeast Turkey.
So what is there a most prominent meteorological system that we see in these sites?
Yeah. I mean, there's different. I'm still working on this, and this is my own research here. I had to kind of, because they haven't published any measurements of the sites accurately. I've had to kind of go into every plan I could find and work it all out. So I'm still working on it. I've published some basic stuff in some lectures, but it's going to be coming out of the new book. I'm going to do a big article about it in the next couple of months as well. But yeah, we're finding it's all about whole numbers. You can only use whole number measurements you're finding, but amazingly, we're finding the megalithic yard, which is 2.72 feet, which is something Alexander Thom kept finding. which is also related to the Spanish Vara. It's a similar kind of length. Um, we're finding the British foot everywhere. I mean, in some cases at Göbekli Tepe, the British foot is like the core. It's like the kind of fundamental one. All the other foot lengths are based around. It's also uh, an old type of Greek foot as well. We have the Persian foot, which is 1.05 English feet, which is prominent at the site. We find that more than any other one. We have the Belgic foot and the Egyptian foot. Now you got to understand, you think these are all random different foot lengths. These are all related. Every foot length I've mentioned is related to the other one by perfect ratio and fractions. So there's a whole system. It's called a module, which was developed by John Michel and John Neal. And so this can all be calculated in your brain as well. You don't need calculators. You just work out the slightly different lengths based upon very simple fractions. You can do it in your brain quite easily. And so what they've now realized, and they published about for many, many years, that Stonehenge has multiple measurements in it. All stone circles. The pyramid has multiple different measurements in it because they're encoding, it's like different qualities into the site. And different designers would want to focus on that particular measurement. Later ones would want to focus on this one. And so you have this to consider. It's not just one core measurement that answers all the questions. This is where people go wrong. This is why they get lost within numbers, because once you understand the module, you understand the system. And clearly these builders understood the module, so they incorporated that into the sites. But you do find a megalithic yard which is outside of the module as well, which is really, really interesting.
And what has been measured? Like, is it the T pillars? Is it the walls? Is it the length and width of the enclosures? All of
Yeah,
the above?
it's mainly, well, the problem is, I mean, it's just the enclosures at the moment.
Okay.
I mean, we've got a few measurements of some pillars, but they're sort of worn and broken, so it's hard. But the enclosures, you can get pretty accurate measurements because they have a bedrock curb around them.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you find the curb where walls have been built upon, like the curb, the kind of raised area which is carved out of bedrock usually, or terrazzo shaped. Just take those measurements basically, and or you go for the back of the T pillar or the front of the T pillar where it touches the ground, things like this. But yeah, I mean, I'm finding it to be consistent, but I've got to do a bit more work on it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, cool.
I've been distracted by other things, but it really it does make sense, especially when you understand the John Neal modular system about how it all fits together. But I'm also working with Howard Crowhurst. He's a master geometer. He's like based in Britain. He's English, but he's done studies all over Britain and Karnak and even Egypt and Sumeria. Now he's applying his work to Göbekli Tepe. He uses something called modular geometry, which is based upon squares, double squares, triple squares, quadruple squares in rows, all perfectly north-south, just squares. That's it. It's called modular. And so the angles between like the two squares together or the three squares is slightly different, or the four squares. And he's finding that those angles and measurements of the diagonals are really important because they often mark astronomical alignments as well. And so it sounds complicated, but visually it's actually quite fun, and you can kind of get into it, and it all kind of makes sense, but it needs a bit of explanation for if people who haven't kind of seen this before. But I think it's quite a simple system. Just need to kind of get your head around it a little bit to kind of but I would love to see perfect measurements actually published by the archaeologists, because they haven't done that.
It seems like a lot of the really good, intriguing information about Göbekli Tepe is coming from people like you, who are open-minded and who are going to these structures and who are attempting to think outside of the box a little bit about what our ancient ancestors were capable of. I mean, where's the knowledge or the information really coming from as it relates to Göbekli Tepe is, I guess, the question, and
Yeah, I
all of
mean,
the ancient sites.
yeah, yeah. There is a narrative put out by the archaeologists and the people working at the site, which is it's very cool. I mean, some of it's really cool. Neshmi Corral, who's doing the main dig at Karahan Tepe, is coming out with some amazing stuff. I really like him. I really like what he's doing. I like what Klaus Schmidt did. I thought he was exceptional. Uh, whereas the people at Göbekli Tepe currently, who are kind of putting out the narrative about it, are very much trying to make it mundane. They're trying to make it like it's a settlement. People live there. That's it, and they're not temples. They're just special buildings, where, people had meetings and things like this. They're trying to take away the sacred. They're saying they all had roofs. Well, there's zero evidence for any roofs. And I've been there with structural engineers and architects who said no way they had roofs. The only way they could have roofs, kind of around the edge, built up on the walls, not the T pillars. The T pillars are useless for roofs. They're too thin at the bottom. They're all different heights, so it'd be a really dangerous roof. And there's no wood kind of being found there either, so it kind of defeats that idea. But you have to question how they keep the pillars raised up, and so they're trying to. And the reason they want there to be roofs is because it takes away all the archaeoastronomical.
Right. They don't have to do any work
been,
on any of that if there's roofs involved.
yeah, but weirdly, like, because I know Andrew's done a lot of work on this. See people like Wigglow Magley, he's done the southern, he believes there's southern orientations, whereas Andrew thinks it's all to the north relating to Cygnus. There's other people who've looked at it as well. There's Martin Sweatman has done this whole analysis of Pillar 43, and we found the winter solstice phenomenon at Karahan Tepe, which is, to be honest with you, I'm not just blowing our own trumpet here, but it's the most solid one because it's like absolutely I mean, everything that's being illuminated through the porthole stone, the stone head itself, is bedrock. It ain't stones that could be moved. This is bedrock, and so you can't budge it. It's fixed, and it was covered over, deliberately buried. Definitely, National Corral wrote a paper about this, so they preserved that alignment at the site. And we were the first ones, me and JJ, back in late 2021. And so, but then they go, oh no, none of this can work. Everything had roofs, and we just say, hang on, so are you sure about this? Because there's no, I mean, and then so what we did is we actually got, I worked with a very, very, very talented guy called Kevin Esslinger. He's a creative 3D digital artist, and through drone footage and some scans I did at the site, he put together a 3D replica of Karahan Tepe. And I even asked him to put the night sky in using stellarium as it was 9000 BC. So he did all this analysis. We've got all the stones where they would be at Karahan Tepe, and weirdly, the sunrise light would come through the two central T pillars of the main enclosure, then go through the porthole stone, then light up the stone head perfectly. It just all worked, and we're like, wow. So let's try it with a roof on it. And so he put a kind of idea, a hypothesis of a roof on top of it, and just by having certain gaps between T pillars and just the structure of the roof without a covering, the light would still come through. And even if you put a covering over it and left certain windows in it, the light of the winter solstice would perfectly come through and still illuminate the stone head. So we realized, oh, we cracked something here, because even now the archaeologists and the other people who are dismissing this can't say that anymore, because we've proven beyond doubt that even with the roof, and you have to have openings in roofs in certain places, just natural way of creating these ancient types of, it still works. And so, so they're trying to, one of the things they're putting out with all the artwork and promotion of Göbekli Tepe is they all had roofs, so it defeats the whole object of any archaeoastronomy. And I think that's a problem, because archaeoastronomy is everywhere. We know it. It's an established discipline in archaeology. Stonehenge, even at the pyramids, the Giza Plateau, all over the world at ancient sites. This is part of it. Newgrange is the most famous winter solstice one, and so we know it's a reality. So the fact that we discovered this winter solstice thing is really odd, because it's been completely ignored by the archaeologists. They don't want anything to do with it. Our good friend Ishmael at the site, who runs the site, we've known him since 10 years or so. He's not allowed to say anything about it. Even when I took my book there, I got a photo with Ishmael and his dad, who owns the land. We got asked to remove it because they don't want to have anything to do with these alternative ideas.
Wow.
So I've already got it banned before I've even properly published it. But yeah, anyway, never mind. But this is the problem. So there's also some political stuff going on in Turkey. kind of, so there's a religious thing, there's all these different things that we don't really see. We just want to crack on and do our research and make it public, where it's a little bit different. They have to kind of tread carefully, and they don't want to upset certain people, I guess.
Yeah, and the alignment with that face on the winter solstice would have been even more perfect 11 or 12,000 years ago. Is that correct? It would have been
That's right.
a bit higher on the
Right.
face.
Yeah. Yeah, we did a whole analysis of it. I worked with Andrew on this, and also Rodney Hale, who's an archaeoastronomer, is also an engineer. He's done lots of archaeoastronomy over the last 40 years or so. And we analysed it carefully in Stellarium. Then we had Kevin Esslinger recreate it with a reconstruction of the site with and without a roof. And everything, it just worked. I mean, basically, because the sun's only moved about 1.5 sun widths, if that. So it's a tiny amount. It's like a degree and a half or something. It's a very small amount. And so what we realized is that back then, we put where the sunrise would be back then, and it comes through the hole even better and illuminates more of the stone head, slightly more. It's only a tiny amount of difference. And we're just lucky it works now, because otherwise we wouldn't have even known anything about it, because it doesn't work till it's like 10 minutes after sunrise, it kicks in. I think back then it would have been like 5 minutes. So it's basically sunrise. Then it kicks in and it works. And for 45 minutes, this blade of light moves around the head like this. It's like, what the hell? And we witnessed it. We went there again the following year and managed to film it and record it. Now they don't want you going there on that time of year. They sort of block it a little bit. But yeah, so this is really important. I wish they'd make a big deal out of it. Not because
it's a huge deal.
We just, because it's like, it'll make people want to go there and visit the site and be there for when something spectacular happens.
Yeah.
And you can still today. It's not like it's gone out of sync. It's like still in line. And I think that's what's really cool. And I think they should make like Newgrange. They have a thing there where you have to kind of go in for this raffle. So like 20 people can go and see it. There's thousands of people apply. They can go and witness it and you can do it over a few mornings. It's not one. Winter solstice is like reaches the most southern point of the horizon. The sun does, and solstice literally means standstill. So it rises in the same position more or less for about 4 days, maybe 5 days. Really, it will still work up until Christmas Day. And then it starts going back slightly further north on the horizon every morning. So you could have 3 or 4 days there, special access visits. They could charge for it, whatever, to go and witness this phenomenon. And it's technically the earliest winter solstice alignment anywhere on the planet.
Yeah.
The only other one close to that is a summer solstice sunset alignment at Jericho, which was discovered by a very, very interesting fellow, Ram Bakai, who's a brilliant archaeologist out there, and that's 8,400 BC, and so it's 1,000 years later. And that was an academic peer-reviewed paper, and it was accepted that they were recording the summer solstice sunset, which is exactly opposite to the winter solstice sunrise, mind you. It's the same alignment, right. So you've got this, and so. Although we're not academics, we've still published it on academia.org and done it as a proper paper. And I know a lot of archaeologists have read it, because you get kind of little notifications who's read it. And so we left it up there, and we're going to do an update on that with the roof analysis, which we didn't have then, which we have now, to say, look, it does work even with the roof. And we even had Martin Sweatman come and speak at our conference about this in Megalithomania in May. And he said, like, the reason he didn't accept it is because it had a roof. And I'm like, oh, that's why it's not being picked up by so many people, because everyone thinks there was a roof, even though there's no evidence of a roof anywhere. So this is why we've got to rewrite the update on it and publish it again with the roof hypothesis proving that it works even with a roof, even though we don't even think there was a roof and there's no evidence for one, which is bizarre, but this is the way it goes. And so, so there's all these little details you have to kind of go into nowadays if you want to get anything like that accepted.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, like, why wouldn't we just assume it just seems lazy. I mean, just to say, oh, there was a roof up there, and so we don't have to do any work to determine whether or not they were using astronomical alignments in any way. Like, it just seems lazy. It seems like it's an easy thing to say. We know this is the case, and therefore it eliminates all of these possibilities. But that's why your discovery is so big, because it shines a bright light on the fact that, hey, these people could tell what was happening with the sun and the moon, and they were measuring the patterns. And why is that so difficult for people to believe, by the way? Like, why is it so hard to believe that we could tell when the sun is at its lowest point in the sky, what day that occurs, and when the sun is at its highest point in the sky? I mean, that is not very difficult to really ascertain from a. I mean, if you're a human being, these are very, very easy things to see with your eyes. So why do you think there's so much resistance to the idea that our ancient ancestors were a bit more observant than we give them credit for?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, to be honest with you. I think it comes down to like understanding as well. If you're not into or understand archaeoastronomy, which I don't know if archaeologists are trained in this or what, then it's hard for them to, accept other people who've studied it for years to come in and say, oh, actually, this is happening here. And I think the problem is there's so many people have put ideas and speculations on Göbekli Tepe over the years. It's hard to prove a lot of them because they're based on star movements, like Cygnus or Sirius, to the Cygnus to the north, Sirius to the south. There's a lot of debate about them. I mean, I think Andrew Collins' stuff is excellent, and Griglo Magli. I think they're both onto something. Also, I want to credit J.J. Ainsworth, who's put it all together at Göbekli Tepe, which is going to publish in our book, which we're keeping partly under wraps, which is like the whole movement of the sky is recorded in the stones at Göbekli Tepe in a profound way. And also possibly we're finding it. She's finding evidence of it at Karahan Tepe as well. And but when it's so you can understand they just get overwhelmed by all these different theories coming in, so they want to just
Yeah.
put a lid on it, literally a roof on it, and just forget about it, because none of it is really 100% just yet. But this winter solstice thing is 100%, and I think that's what is really, you know, annoying the people over there because it's pretty solid. And you go there
Yeah.
today and you'll see it on the winter solstice. It's not like we're fudging it, you know. We haven't moved any stones or anything, to make it work. It's there and it works. And so that I think it's gonna every winter solstice is gonna happen for the next hundreds of years, whether they like it or not.
Right. That face that gets lit up on the winter solstice sits above an area that looks as if it was dug out of the bedrock, and that pillars were left in the bedrock, and it
Yeah.
almost looks like it was filled with water at some point in time. And so I wonder, you mentioned the air conditioning and how our ancient ancestors were using water and flowing water to cool buildings, and potentially this is the first evidence of an ancient air conditioning. But how deep does this water conversation at Göbekli Tepe and other sites that are similar to it go? I mean, could some of these enclosures have been completely filled with water?
In Göbekli Tepe and at Karahan Tepe, the problem with the water theory is that they were harvesting rainwater. That's all they had. Apparently, there's no natural springs or rivers or streams anywhere near either of these two sites. Now, many of the other sites there are, like at Nevalı Çori, Ceyhanu, Tigris River sites, and Ganlahoyak, an unexcavated site, has a spring which feeds actually Shanliurfa. So the other sites had it, but these two for some reason don't and didn't. Like, there's no real evidence they had any natural water source anywhere nearby. But there's good evidence that they were very smart and they were collecting and harvesting rainwater. It's something that Lee Clare, who's one of the archaeologists at Göbekli Tepe, has written about. And it makes sense. They got these huge kind of bell-shaped underground things with big slabs on top to protect them, where water would collect. They have channels carved out to collect it as well. So they would certainly trying to preserve and use water. It really does. It looks like there's water erosion. It looks like
Right.
that, but no one's really sure because they can't understand it. If they could collect enough rainwater for that to work. That's one of the big questions. Although there are many underground bell-shaped water collection chambers on the opposing hill called Ketley Tepe as well. And so, yeah, but one of the, if you actually look at it, next to what's called structure AB with the pillars and the head,
Yes.
there's a channel coming into it. And on the other side of it, there's the porthole stone. And below the other side of the porthole stone in the main enclosure is a big kind of area in the ground called well, just big hole where water could move through one to the other and collect and then fill up that area there. And so I've got a feeling they whenever they could, they had water, like they worked with it. And so I really think there's something in there, but I think they had to harvest the rainwater. They couldn't. There wasn't any local springs or waterways that they could actually get the water from itself. Although, like I said, the other settlements were right next to the water, which were much more, to my opinion, much more domestic sites. These were special use sites, in my opinion, which goes against what the archaeologists are saying.
So here's a crazy idea that I'd love to just have you consider for a second. And thinking about that guy whose face gets lit up on the winter solstice and what that could mean and why he's sitting above a pool of an area that looks like it could be filled with water. And then, as you just mentioned, you've got these channels, and the channel would come in from an area that doesn't look like there's a real water source over there to fill up this tub. And what could all of this, and then why would it be flowing into another tub if there's not really a stream or a source of water? Where's all this water coming from? And then what if this site, the origins of this site, not the walls that have been dated to 11,600 years ago, but the origins of the site were significantly older, going back to the Ice Age? What if the water source was when there was a massive glacier over the northern hemisphere, and you're talking about a mile high ice sheet, and during the winter solstice, the sun comes in, it lights up this guy's face. That's the coldest day of the year. We know it's going to start to warm up after this. We know the glaciers are going to start to melt. We know that this area is going to start to fill up with water. Because as the glaciers melt, they were harvesting glacier water as it began to melt off of the ice cap and fill up a lot of these ancient sites. Is that even so I know that if you look at that latitude, it would be around where the northern part of the United States is. And we had a glacier that extended all the way down just below the Canadian border. So it's not that far of a stretch to think that potentially at some point in our ancient history, this area of the world may have had an ice sheet on top of it. We don't necessarily exactly know where the ice sheets came to. Could they have been harvesting glacier water annually as the ice sheets melted a bit and filled up some of these structures to use for bathing, for cleaning, for drinking, for even drinking the water for the year potentially, or for childbirth, for for all of these things that a civilization would need water from? Could they have been harvesting glacier water, I guess is my question.
I don't know.
It's crazy, right? I've never heard anybody mention this.
No, I mean, maybe you've nailed it. I mean, maybe you've just nailed it. Maybe that's exactly what they were doing. I mean, I just don't know if they. I mean, someone else mentioned this recently. They commented on one of my videos, I think I did recently, and said, "What about glacier water?" So it's other people are thinking about it.
Okay.
Because they believe it's older as well, and so. It could well be. I mean, I got a feeling as well. If you look at the climate right at the beginning of when it warmed up, it was wetter. This is what a lot of people keep telling me. Some research backs this up. I know one of the archaeologists put this out as well. It was slightly wetter, and so there was more rain to collect. But this was at certain times a year, and not all year round. And so I think this is why I believe as well. You've got, cyclical use of these sites, like specifically going into the winter solstice area, zone, which I believe was me and JJ have written a couple of articles on Graham Hancock's website about this, where we believe it's a fertility site. We believe water was used. We believe the winter solstice was part of this, and it could have actually been um, other astronomical things going on there as well. Andrew Collins has found a few things there as well, which sort of back up the winter solstice thing as well. And so, yeah, I think there might have been more water. Now, I don't know about the glacial thing. I mean, it could well be. I mean, they could find evidence of much earlier dates, which might support your new hypothesis.
Okay. Yeah, but there's no current explanation for how those areas could have been completely filled with water. Is that correct? I mean, there's no streams. There's not enough really rain. I mean, you're up at the top of a hill to really fill those things with water as they appear to have been intended. I mean, it appears that they're intentionally designed to be tubs or pools in a couple of those cases, especially the guy with the sun on his face in the winter solstice. Yeah. I mean, but there's not. Am I correct that there's not a natural source of water around there that could have been used for completely filling that up?
No, I don't think there is. I mean, yeah. According to the data, I mean, we tried to look into it as much as we could. There's definitely none there now. I mean, the closest source is Shanlurf, or it's a place called Sogmatar Oasis, which is like 30 or 25 miles away. But some people have suggested there could have been ancient springs which are completely dried up. But there would be some evidence of them in the geology there, which there isn't. And so at the moment, we're drawing a blank on it. But I think now there's evidence of harvesting rainwater at Göbekli Tepe, then we think that must have been what was going on. But it's just baffling, why, then you have to question, why would they build these sites in these remote high areas, not near water? What was how could you, why would you want to live there? Why wouldn't you want to live where the flowing water is and where we can survive easier? Like where many of these other sites are. So to me, this is why I believe these are very special sites. They weren't used like the more domestic, the settlements were used. I think these were like, where the real priestly elites might go, or the shamans, and there'd be maybe a few people up there all year round keeping an eye on it and looking after it, cleaning it up, things like that. Maybe collecting the water from the local cisterns, which were built into the bedrock, bringing it up for certain ceremonies and rituals at certain times of year. So I think to me that's more like it. That's my kind of feeling on it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and you asked the question, why would you want to be up in that area anyway? What would be about that area that could help your survival as a human? And man, I mean, that's a beautifully clean source of just fresh water, just pure, fresh, clean water, potentially, coming off of an ice sheet. So it's interesting to think about. If the audience could let me know what you think in the comments, because I was thinking about doing a crazy idea series on this as a new idea that I haven't heard anybody else mention. It's unfortunate that you said somebody made a comment on it, because at least one other person has thought of this. But it seems like a possibility that's worth exploring anyway. But yeah, moving past that maybe a bit, what about the stone plates? And to find the plates was a big discovery and a big surprise to a lot of people. And I think when you look at people that are interested in the vase work and potentially exploring alternatives for how old a lot of the stone vases might be, and potentially those being heirlooms and given to the Egyptian people, well, that was very much laughed at early on by a lot of people. And I think it's still, we still don't know for sure, but this discovery of these plates coming out of Göbekli Tepe, I mean, if they were capable of 11 or 12,000 years ago making hard stone plates out of granite, why couldn't they have made a jar, a vessel, what we might refer to as a vase today, out of granite? So, yeah, if you could you talk a little bit about that discovery and what you think it means? What's the importance of it?
Yeah, okay. Karahan Tepe, they found a few at Göbekli Tepe as well, but they weren't really publicized. They found some at Jan Lahoyak as well. But the ones at Karahan Tepe, the initial excavations They found them on the sort of benches, if you like, or the kind of areas between the T-pillars and the outer ring. They would find these plates placed, specifically placed in areas, as though they were sacred. They weren't just dinner plates and things like this. They were used for something ceremonial. Some of them are like 1.5 feet wide, 2 feet wide. They're all different kind of. The ones I've seen, there's only like 6 or 7 on display, and we had a geologist come and look at them as well, when he was with us in May. And yeah, and he just said what we thought all along. Some of them there's like two types of basalt. There's like a granite type thing. You couldn't work out really what it was, whether it was granodiorite or something like this. But some of them are extremely dark, darker than the basalt which you get from Karahan Mountain, which is to the northeast, from Göbekli Tepe. And they found also, some of them were broken, but some of them, one of them was like, so they got perfect kind of really round them, the kind of little edges. They're really kind of precise, oddly precise. And, maybe, like I say, not to the level of the Egyptian vases and things like this, but one of them has a kind of cut mark, beautifully smoothed out into the middle, perfectly. Like they've softened it and just smoothed it out, and like this little cut mark, this little indentation, perfectly circular, blending back into the plate, which again is just, I mean, how on earth would you do that? And then recently, in a new area they've just excavated at Karahan Tepe, they call it the kitchen because they found a kiln in it, which I believe was probably used to make the terrazzo floor. They found Anatolian viper snake bones in it and other animals. And they found a whole cache of plates, which hopefully are going to be on display when we go there in a couple of months. Because, and that, they say it's the kitchen where they prepared food, but I'm thinking, who eats snakes? And so, is this actually a ceremonial area? It's what Andrew and our friend Debbie Cartwright called an alchemical kitchen, more likely. This is like where they produced, the different sacraments and things like this, even medicines. And the plates may have been part of that. But yeah, I mean, I've got a question for you because I've heard that Ben was telling me some of these old vases from Egypt are from extremely ancient sites. They go back to the same era as Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. Now, is that correct?
Yeah, Ben has found an image of a burial that appears to have stone vases in it that look to be of the type that the Egyptians are credited for, and the burial dates to something like 11,000 or 12,000 years ago, and so. Yeah, I mean, if that image is real and authentic, and it's an authentic burial, then it certainly seems to indicate that these were around for a lot longer than we think. So, yeah, that's a big piece of evidence. I haven't personally seen it. I've just seen it in the videos that Ben's put out, but it's very compelling.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, we've got this connection with the ancient Egypt, you see, because there are pre-pottery Neolithic areas in Egypt. I think one of the sites called Koshka or something. I forget the name of it. And this is where this vase apparently was found in this very ancient burial. But remember, I mentioned the Helwan points, the kind of arrowheads, the microblade technology. We get the same ones in Shanliurfa, a place called Yemen Hali, as you do in ancient Egypt, the same era. And so there was obviously some kind of connection between these two. And so were the kind of master masons who could work the stone, working, in and out of these areas, makes you wonder. And I think, again, this whole new cache of plates, I haven't really seen them close up. Again, it's just like, why not? If these are just eating vessels, why go to so much trouble to make them? And also, some of them were deliberately broken and left on the benches at the end of their use before the site was covered up as well. So you got to me, that's more proof of more ceremonial use.
Yeah, what are the tool marks like on some of the plates? Like, do you see tool marks? Because in a lot of the vases, just horizontal tool marks on the interior, and you never see tool marks on the exterior of them, on the outside walls, but always on the interior. Which, well, it gives you clues as to how they were potentially made. But do we see tool marks on the plates?
I think there are, yeah. I think you can see them, and some of them are kind of weathered weirdly as well. They're kind of weathered, and some are most of them are broken and put back together.
Yep.
Should add, but some of them have been clearly polished. You know, you can see there's polishing. I think the one with the cut mark in it is like really baffling because that seems to be like. I mean, they must have used obsidian for the fine work on them. But again, it's like some of this stone looks harder than limestone. So again, it's hard to tell. I mean, they're not even telling us what they're made of,
Right.
officially. There's no official thing. Although I think there's a mention that they came from Karahan Mountain, which is the basalt kind of volcano to the north where the first acorn wheat was ever developed. And so that was deemed as the sacred mountain, if you like. We went up there last time we were there, actually. It's like vast amounts of basalt thrown about everywhere. But I think there are tool marks. So, and I think these were like the kind of almost like amulets of the elites there. I think these were their special objects. Like you get in Britain and Scotland, you have these sort of carved stone spheres, which are like beautifully geometric, from the Bronze Age, Neolithic, Ascara Bray and other places, or Nessa Brodguy and Orkney. I think these were like their kind of ceremonial kind of special objects, that the elites would carry about and maybe bring. I mean, maybe they're made from lots of. Some people have suggested their stone comes from different areas, so these were different tribes or whatever coming in with their kind of gifts of the stone plates made of their local kind of stone.
Did you mention earlier that there was a time of the year when we're told what has been excavated, what has been learned, whether it's new plates, new bowls? Is it September? Did you say that all of that information is released?
Yeah, generally it's late September, early October. The last couple of years, especially. This is because the dig season ends at the end of September. This is like they start like around May or June, and really only do it till then. I think sometimes at Göbekli Tepe they keep it going a bit further because they've got the roof and everything. And they actually cover up parts of the site in early October. Sometimes, because they kind of leave it alone and just have a couple of guards there, which you can still visit, like Karahan Tepe. But so you have to kind of, it's best to go before they do that because you get to see all the new stuff and often they make a big deal out of it. So we're going to hopefully be there for that. Even though they don't like us very much, we're still going to turn up and go and see what we can see. But a few things even from the last dig season. I mean, even no, there's even stuff coming out already. They've kind of started to release a few things. They've started like Göbekli Tepe excavating enclosure B, the northern section of it. This is one of the main enclosures. Actually, it's one of the geometries I've looked at, but I'm really delighted because they're going to move away a lot of the rubble and the wall and actually see. I want to see where the T pillars are in enclosure B because I want to work out if there's any geometry associated with that. So that's they're actually doing that. But it's very slow work at Göbekli Tepe for some reason. I mean, I know Jimmy Corsetti put a thing out about it, a big kind of scandal about them not excavating it, WEF involvement and things like this, and that is it's kind of that is valid, that is interesting, but thankfully they are. It seems they are digging a little bit more there. I really do hope with Karahan Tepe, they don't stop. They just crack on. And I think Neshmi Corral's got it in his mind, that head archaeologist, that they've got to get the whole site done. It really needs to be done because of, before they can kind of think about, halting any excavations there.
Yeah. Do you think that everyone is being completely forthright with with the information that the world is being given, with the things that have been dug up, with what we know about it? Do you think that all of the information is being given out, or do you think that there's anything that's being held back from any of these sites?
Yeah, I totally believe that stuff's being held back. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the fact that we're going out there and discovering half a T pillar lying on the ground,
Yeah.
an unexcavated site. We're finding tunnels, near other sites that could be thousands of years old, carved out of solid bedrock. Um, Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, you're not allowed to go to certain areas of Göbekli Tepe unless you're friends with the archaeologist, and I think that's unfortunate because it blocks. You know, it's blocking research. I mean, they've got whole areas at Göbekli Tepe with roofs on. No one's allowed to go to. It's bizarre. And like you question why don't they just lay down a path to those areas and have guard there so people can at least have a look because it's like why not what you're hiding it's like it's just weird. It's kind of weirdly kind of insular. And even Karahan Tepe is a little bit more open. You kind of walk around most of the site now, but they don't let you see certain things until they're ready to see it. That's the way it works there. So we try and stick to, we want to climb over and see everything. That's our kind of nature, but we do stick by the rules to maintain good relations out there. And yeah, and it's just I think like I say, towards the end of the dig season, this is when the new stuff gets kind of revealed.
Hmm.
And even though we've seen photos of a lot of the new artifacts, a lot of them still aren't in the museum yet, which is strange because I've seen particular photos of artifacts I have in my lecture, for instance. I've actually illustrated them for my little wooden book. Um, they're still not on display, which is kind of strange. And some of the stuff they do find at some of the sites, they rebury, take a few photos of it, then rebury it for some reason.
Hmm.
This is known at Göbekli Tepe. They've done that with some really amazing pieces.
Yeah, it's just like why wouldn't you want the information to be out there unless it's in conflict with what the existing narrative of our history is. I mean, unless there's something different and unique that we've discovered or learned that we don't think people are ready for, why would we hide? Why would people hide information from the world, from being able to learn what our ancestors were actually capable of? It's just one of those people things that's very, very frustrating, that when people attempt to conceal or hide information, and you hate to talk about it because you sound like a conspiracy theorist, but yeah, in a lot of places, in a lot of cases, it seems like that's what's happening. And yeah, for me, this one smells a little fishy too. It's like, why wouldn't we just keep digging and continue to excavate and just put this on display for the entire world to see so that we can learn?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that. I think it's not just one archaeologist um, making those rules. I think there's people above him. There's the government. There's different influences they have to kind of adhere to. Um, it's a World Heritage Site as well. Things like this. So there's lots of different things. Why that might be happening. Um, but I think fundamentally, I agree with you. I think this is an exciting time of discovery. Let's get it
Yeah.
all out there. I mean, because again, clearly they're not going to excavate the whole of Göbekli Tepe. They've said that openly. They've actually said that they're going to do some more, but they're going to leave it to future generations they say when the technology improves. I mean, this is what's happening at a place in Orkney called the Nessa Brodgar, which is a major discovery. It's been excavated for the last 10, 15 years. I've been up there like 6 times. I've had a look at it. And they're going to cover that over and bury it,
Mm.
which is what the hell?
Yeah.
It's like, what is wrong with you? Just why don't you just put a nice roof on it, build a structure around it, and have it open to the public? Why would you rebury it?
Right.
And they seem to think that's a good idea.
Mm.
It's to me, it's all backwards, that side of things. We have the technology, we have the funds to preserve these sites, dig them up, and protect them as well. So what's stopping that?
Yeah, what didn't we cover? What do you think is the? I mean, we talked about a lot. We talked about cement. We talked about alcohol. We talked about stone plates. We talked about the winter solstice. I mean, there's a lot of great knowledge here. Anything that we did not cover that you think is worth going over?
I think we did cover quite a bit actually.
Hmm.
Obviously, I think we mentioned the geometry already. But I think the key is that um, there's some very strange pieces coming out. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me, actually, yeah, we can mention this, is I mentioned it, JJ and I wrote about this in our article, that in Nevalı Çori, there's a head, like it's probably part of a taller statue, which has this serpent ponytail going down the back, which is just like a Vedic priest ponytail from India. And then recently, so I'm looking at haircuts now for some weird reason. And then the new statue at Karahan Tepe, 7.5 feet tall. This new, he's holding his phallus. He's kind of, very excited. He's got ribs. He's got like a beard, like an Egyptian kind of fake beard on him, with a V-neck underneath it. But his hair is like kind of shaved around the ears here, shaved all around here.
Mhm.
And he's got this whole mullet kind of thing going back and then flat on the bottom. And so we're looking at now, we're starting to get an impression of what these people look like, which I think is really fascinating. And the fact that this statue is 7.5 feet tall is pretty impressive, because many of the other statues, like Urfa Man or what's called the Beal statue, which is 8,400 BC, that's found in Urfa with the site there that's now been built over. Um, that was a life-size statue, whereas this is 7.5 feet tall. So is that life size? Were the people very tall back then? So this is starting to ask a lot of questions about what these people look like. But it seems like they had crazy cool haircuts. That's one thing. And the fact is, and also we're finding lots of Vedic connections with the site, something I'm looking into. There's an author called B.G. Siddharth who wrote about the Vedic connection to Nevalı Chori because of this
I'm sorry, but
statue.
Vedic is like a Hindu,
Yeah, ancient
Indian.
Hindu, yeah.
Okay.
And even the astronomy matches some of it as well now. And B.G. Siddharth was one of the main proponents. They was writing about this in the 1990s, late 90s. Our friend Charles Koss made a video claiming that the pillar shrine or structure maybe with all the phallic pillars and the stone head, it's actually like a Shiva lingam, like an early representation of a Shiva lingam, which is a fertility kind of cult kind of thing, which we still have in India. Went to India in February for a few weeks and saw all these Shiva lingams, and to me it was just like, my God, these are like kind of progression from what we're finding in southeast Turkey, so there's all these connections that haven't quite been properly made yet, which are starting to kind of come together. And I think that's going to be very compelling over the next few years as more discoveries get made and prove these points I've been mentioning.
Well, yeah, fascinating. I mean, so this is kind of the ancient lost civilization, I think, in your mind anyway, and I think in a lot of people's minds that everyone is looking for. Like that, well, here it is. It's like we've got everything. I mean, as much as we could possibly have left over from a civilization that existed over 11,000 years ago, we have, which is essentially rocks and stones and structures. I mean, is that where your head is with the importance of what it is that we're finding here?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's too compelling to like not focus on it for me. I just can't take my mind off it. It's where it's happening. I mean, Egypt is amazing, Peru's amazing, Stonehenge is amazing, all these kind of sites, but everyone's worked on them for years. There's millions of books and projects and research and analysis and everything else. This is literally the time of discovery. This is why I find it so interesting that we're discovering things every time we go out there, we're finding new things, sometimes making our own discoveries, which is like amazing. You can't really do that in Egypt or Peru so much. It's not like, but so, and the age of it is just ridiculous. We're finding it's twice as old as the Giza pyramids, at least twice as old as Stonehenge. And so it's just the age of it doesn't make any sense, especially now we're considering these are actually older than what we're being told as well. And so I think, I just urge people to just turn their eyes and have a look at it, because um, you know, this is where to me, this is where it's all happening. And I think the next few years are going to be critical, and it might give us some deeper understanding of who we are and where we came from.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back on after September when these things are when they release the new findings and talk about some of the amazing discoveries that have happened over the last year. So do you envision this as like again, I go back to what could our ancient ancestors have been doing? What were all these people doing? And all of these different little enclosures, which are almost like little rooms. I mean, do you envision that people could have been teaching a class about astronomy or math or geometry in some of these places, and they could have been childbirth in other places and performing surgeries in other places and bathing in other places, and I mean, could this have been hospitals and all of the basics of what we would consider civilization today? I mean, it just seems like we've got all of these different compartments. They're all built a little bit differently. Potentially, each of them had a different end use. Could this have been just a civilization of people that were living together who built all of these different areas and all of these different rooms in order to enhance their civilization, enhance their knowledge, teach their children, birth children as effectively and safely as possible, cure illness and treat illness and disease, and just accomplish all of the things that we might think of as civilization today and what we're accomplishing today. I mean, is that kind of how you envision all of these sort of sites that are scattered around this geographical area that seem to all be connected?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think these were places of teaching. I think these were what are called memory spaces. This is like the nature of pre-literate societies, although but I believe there's evidence there now of they were trying to develop language. You can see that in some of the symbols, which JJ's been working on. And I think, the memory space idea was actually put forward by Klaus Schmidt originally, and it was developed by the author as well. I forget her name, Lynn, someone. And this makes sense because it's like you go into these, you go into like these enclosures, like you got a reconstruction of enclosure D actually at the Shanlerfer Museum, which is incredible. And you go in there and you realize these are important sacred spaces. This is like a kind of cathedral. They're massive. They're like 18-foot tall pillars. It's like unbelievable. And it seems like you could just go around to each section where people sitting around the benches telling stories and information from one pillar, which is encoded so only maybe the elites would understand it on some levels, but then they would then be able to go and teach the initiates to come in and we'll look at this. And maybe that time of year, this one gets lit up by the sunrise. We'll talk about this. And it's all designed in this astronomical configuration, in my opinion. And certain things would get lit up at certain times of year. That's when the teaching would go to that part. Your teachings about animals, there's different animals and what's dangerous, what things like this, astronomy, like you say, medicine, especially with the new discovery at Karahan Tepe, this sort of alchemical kitchen potentially, where they were preparing all these different strange medicines. But yeah, I think it all makes sense. And I think they were also ritual spaces. They were also communal spaces. They were also, where people would gather and have meetings because there's, and would give recitals and song and dance even. It's highly likely because you flatten in the floor, you got all this space. It's quite a lot of space in these enclosures. You can dance around. The acoustics are amazing. There's been a lot of research done on the acoustics now, where if you stand in the middle, everyone can hear you around the edge and it would echo around really beautifully. So there could have been oracle spaces as well, where they're receiving information. So all sorts of possibilities. And I think all of them are valid. I think they're all as valid as one another. And we shouldn't just accept what's on Wikipedia now, which is just that they're called special buildings where people would meet up and do certain things. I think there's a lot more to it than that. I think these, you can see that just in the carvings, in the symbolism, in the innovation, in all the discoveries there. It's like these weren't mundane places. These were very, very special sacred places.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, fantastic. Really good stuff. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. I know we've this time has flown by, so we're already a couple hours in. It doesn't seem like it yet, but I know that we have covered a lot. Any final thoughts before we kind of close it out?
Yeah, I just urge people to look into these places and keep an eye on what's coming out because of the nature of it is that this is the time of discovery. And also I think you've got to keep an open mind about don't allow, I think this is in a general sense, don't allow the narrative to be just what you see on Wikipedia, but I think most people don't really take much notice of that too much nowadays.
No.
There's a lot more to these places than meets the eye. And I think, this could open up a whole doorway. I mean, imagine, just think about all the history books that are now being rewritten. It's crazy because of these discoveries. And I think when we start looking into the area beyond that zone, beyond the Taş Tepeler region, we're going to find a much grander network, which was prevalent and possibly even influencing the whole planet, going over the few thousand years since it was built. And I think this is something we're looking into, me and JJ Ainsworth, for our next book, our next project.
Cool. Nice. How can people how can people follow you? How can people follow your work?
Sure, didn't get this. This is my little book, Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the world's first megaliths. That's available. It's got loads of cool illustrations in it. We cover everything we've covered today. I think it's going to be available in America. There's a new edition in America coming out very soon. Yeah, it's just a fantastic little read, fun little read, but covers a lot. We go for it. But yeah, a lot of our research they can get through just by searching for Hugh Newman or megalithomania.co.uk. Yeah, we've got a lot of stuff up online. Events, we do events like conferences. We've got one coming up in November called the Origins Conference in Wiltshire, England. We've got some fantastic speakers, myself and Andrew and JJ and several others. We obviously we do tours twice a year to this area as well, and we have to do these things we don't have any funding or anything like that. This is our career, our job. We focus on it 100%. So we rely on these, this kind of little bits of income to kind of fund our research and projects, because this is the only way we can really do that. And we like staying independent as well. We like being independent researchers, like focusing on what we want to focus on without too much outside influence. I think that's important. Yeah, and so yeah, people can just check out megalithomania.co.uk or search for me, Hugh Newman.
Love it. Great. Yeah, good stuff. Great job at the Cosmic Summit. It was a really impressive presentation that you gave there, and it made me want to connect. And I know usually I try to do these in person, obviously, but it's it's quite a distance we've got between us. But hopefully in the future we can make that happen. It's been great talking to you, man. It's been really good to connect. Yeah, look forward to continuing to follow your work. It's obviously very important work that you're doing. I mean, I'm with you. This site, how do you not get hooked on this site and everything that it has to offer and exploring it? I mean, today it's where things are happening. It's where we're going to learn the most about our ancient past from these sites that exist within Turkey. It seems rather obvious at this point. So it's a very, very big, important deal and an important work that you're doing. So I know that I speak for everybody who's listening when we say thank you for doing what you're doing. Keep your mind as open as it is, and we look forward to finding out more of what you have to explore and to teach us about these ancient sites. So thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. We'll wrap it up with that.